Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cade's independent media production. Today we're talking about another contentious subject, pre-muffled snare heads. What are they good for? What are they not so good for? Why you might want one? What do they sound like? I say this is contentious because everybody I know who uses pre-muffled snare heads uses them for a very specific reason, and they like them very much. People who are against them tend to be aggressively against them. And it's been a very interesting thing to kind of see, especially as I started working with other drummers, helping them get good sounds and experiencing the way they hit and the drums and heads that they are using personally. I myself do use them for special occasion kind of things, and that's sort of what brought me at least to being interested in talking about this, because the thing that they do is really, really special, and for me it's not an everyday thing, and for some other people it is an everyday thing, but we wanted to kind of dive into basically like, what are they for, what do you lose when you use them, what do you gain, and a few kind of examples of like what I might use them for. So what do we talk about when we talk about pre-muffled heads? There's a few kind of layers to this. The most obvious one that people I think of is a standard head with some kind of sound control ring underneath that is contacting the bearing edge and kind of behaving similarly to a lot of pre-muffled bass drum heads that we use, EQ4s, things like that. Additionally, we do have to take into account that a two-ply head has a similar situation going on, which is that these two plies are working together and also a little bit against each other and also adding mass, which is another kind of more uniform muffling of that head. Way less dramatic, but still kind of part of the equation. In addition to all of that, as you'll see today, some of these heads are also vented. They have tiny holes drilled or pressed or cut into them in some manner that allow some air to escape to further change the behavior and feel of the head. First up, we want to get kind of a baseline here to compare everything else to. So we're fitting our Supraphonic today with a coated G1, single ply, 10 mil, pretty normal kind of head, tuned in the medium up range where we like to tune this drum. So we're going to have you hear that, and then we're going to start to experiment with the other ones. Predictable sound, on the ringy side, wide open, sounds good, sounds like this drum sounds. So now we want to jump over to the first example, which is a head called a Genera. Now this head here is interesting because it's basically structurally similar to the G1. It's a slightly different film, but we're essentially dealing with the same head with the addition of a sound control ring that's a little, maybe an inch, maybe a little less than an inch underneath. And it really changes the behavior, feel, and overall kind of tone of the head. Basically, moving to this head is it's kind of like playing a new drum. Now the main thing we want to talk about here is if you're used to the wide open sound, or if you're used to a single ply or sort of standard head and you've been putting muffling on it, what is the difference here? Well, thing number one is this muffling is super duper thin. It's really, really, really thin. And it is also uniform around the edge. When you add things to a small area such as tape or gels and things like that, you're isolating mass in one spot, which is going to change the behavior of the overtones. It might make the drum kind of act wacky or feel wacky in different places because of it being not uniform. When you have a thing like this all the way around the edge that is also getting pressed into the head by the pressure of the tuning, you get a really clean response of the muffling all the way around the head, and it makes the entire head behave the same way. Just on a cursory listen, this is a pretty dramatically different sound. We didn't go after the exact same pitch, but we got kind of as close as we could. And as you can hear, it's a little bit tricky because there's almost no overtone going on in this head, whether I play in the center, the edge, the rim shot. It's very, very controlled. It's very punchy, and it has a lot more low, mid, and kind of mid attack to it with a lot of the high end suppressed. Experiences I've had with people who like heads like this in live situations and also in the studio is that they'll do certain things to get more highs out of it, whether it's EQing or maybe choice of sticks, nylon tips, things like that, to balance that out against having that really clean, almost gated and almost to a degree like pre-mixed kind of sound out of their drum. Now on the flip side, if you're used to, again, like a standard sort of head that doesn't have this added mass around the edge, when you tune up a drum with a head like this, you're going to experience a little bit of rebound loss. You're going to experience a lot of overtone loss if you're expecting to hear that, or if you're into that kind of sound, that's going away. And additionally, there can be boxiness in certain tunings. You may have to experiment a little bit with the range of the drum and possibly even change the tension of the snare side to make sure that the heads work together, because despite it just being a ringer on the edge, there's a significant difference in the mass in terms of the behavior of the head. So diving into it and tuning it the same as the other head is not necessarily the right thing to do, depending on what you normally like to use. And you're also going to run into some limitations in the higher tensions where it may start to choke out. But then conversely, in low tensions, you might get a better kind of fat sound than you would with a standard head with no muffling. Now for me, where heads like this shine are situations where I'm going to be playing pretty hard, and also where I need to make sure that there isn't too much sustain or overtone presence in the snare because the notes are very close together, whether it's dense fills or playing super aggressive backbeats at a high tempo. This kind of compartmentalizes the snare away from everything else so that as a listener or in a mixing situation, it kind of lives in its own space and you don't have to contend with all of that extra stuff coming off of it, running into the other mics and kind of sort of dirtying everything up. This, in fact, is a perfect example of something we spoke about recently, which is the difference between resonance and sustain. With this head on this drum right now, the resonance is great. The sustain, super short. Now let's go one step further in this direction. We're going to move to a head called an HD dry. This is a 2-ply head. They're thin plies. It also has a relatively small control ring around the edge and the addition of dry vents all the way around. This is a head that is going toward the dry thing, going toward the punchy thing, and also trying to get us into more durability. Where the previous, the Genera, is still your standard kind of 10 mil single ply. This is 2-ply. This is more in the vein of something like a G2. You can hit this head really, really hard. It's going to hang in there, but then there are some caveats when you start to add that kind of mass to a snare batter. The addition of the vents around the edge allows air to escape, which helps to both kind of control overtones and also make the response a little bit faster, because when you start to box that air in with all of that mass, it can start to make things feel and behave a bit sluggishly. This is a head I associate with hitting very hard and also with playing music where, generally speaking, you need clarity, you need a lot of punch, and you need it to basically last through that kind of assault. As a result of these aspects, versatility suffers a little bit with a head like this. We're dealing with something that is fairly specialized and went through a lot of R&D to get to where it is. And it's important to note that versatility is not the end-all be-all goal of whatever product you're using, whatever head you're using, stick, whatever. There are times where a specialized thing like this is actually the right choice, and then you can work with that in that situation and find what versatility it does have, make some new discoveries, and have it as an added tool. This for me is a super great head for things like baritone snare drums, snoms, situations where I want to tune it super low because the mass is really helpful. The overtone ring keeps things in control. The vents keep it from getting too boingy and strange at those low tensions. And that's not even really what it's for, but that was, for instance, like my experiment that I discovered, and now I kind of can't do without it. All right, now that we've run through everything, we'd like to do a comparison here of all of these in a row. We're going to start with single hits for kind of just the snare comparison, and then we'll do some grooves. Now, circling back to a thing that we say an awful lot here, these are all valid sounds, these are all good sounds, and they are all for certain situations. They can be for a lot of different situations, and this is a perfect example of, for instance, something that I didn't know was going to be super useful to me until I tried it out and spent some time experimenting with it at home just to see if it was something that I wanted to add to my toolbox, and lo and behold, it worked out great. So where are we now? Where we are is we've kind of thought about a lot on this channel, different ways to muffle and control standard heads. This is kind of on the other side of the spectrum. I think of this almost like a preset where this is in front of you, you know what it's going to do, and there's not a lot of tweaking to be done. And frankly, if we added more muffling to this, not a whole lot would change because we've already done so much. So if you're in a situation where you want to be tweaking things and adjusting things a little bit, you can start out with a standard head, try out tape and gels and all those things. And on the flip side, if you know what this does, you can just choose that and not have to mess around at all, put it on, and you're good to go. It's also really worth mentioning that there are a lot of pre-muffled snare batters out there in the world. I think that every drum brand makes something that could fall in that category. Within the brands, there are a lot of options. Evans even has some that are like of the orchestral vein, you know, like there's a lot of different options here. And I think it's fair to think about it like what kind of spice you want to have. You know, you can have something really dramatic, you can have something really subtle, but with a situation like this, it's nice to know what it is ahead of time. And if you try out a few of them, you can know what the right thing is to choose for the situation in front of you. All right, everybody, thanks so much. That about wraps it up. Please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can hear about all of our new videos. And thank you especially for joining us as we close Season 3. This is the last episode of Season 3. We have a alarmingly large spreadsheet of ideas for Season 4 that we're going to be diving into. Well, technically, we've already dove into it a little bit. But thanks so much, particularly to the patrons for keeping us going here. Patreon, if you haven't been, please follow the link below. It's really keeping us going here. It's keeping our hopes and dreams alive. And we are excited to hear from you in Season 4. We've got lots of ideas. We want to hear your ideas. If you have thoughts about pre-muffled snare heads, we would love to hear those ideas too. I'd love to know what you do with them, what you don't do with them, if you love them, if you hate them, what your favorite one is. And we will see you next season.